look at another pedal today. Moving right along here, we've studied the open tunings in C6. We've studied also the fourth pedal that's common in the C6 setup. Now we're going to move into the fifth pedal. The fifth pedal on the C6 setup, as used by Jimmy Day, did quite a bit actually. It pulls 4 strings. And so this is probably going to be the one place on the entire tuning where I do one thing different. And that is, I just simply disregard one of the notes. For starters, this is a D position pedal, if you will. So if I was playing behind a C6 guitar, I could just, in my open tuning, I could hit that fifth pedal and I would have basically a D chord. So it shifts the guitar from a C right up into a D position. Really a strong D7 kind of position, as you can kind of hear what I'm doing here. Okay, so let's look at this a little bit and break it down. Their 10th string, when they hit the fifth pedal on the C6 guitar, is going to become from a C to a D. Okay, doesn't sound like that, because what I'm doing is I use my 11th string, which is tuned to an F at the first fret there in my C mode. And when I push my first pedal, and this is basically my first pedal is how you're going to view what you would use as a pedal 5 in a C6 setup, you go from the F note all the way down to D. So you've got this, which is kind of cool just in and of itself, of kind of how you can get into certain things. From there, everything else kind of balances out. Now, what he does on his 9th string, it also pulls to an F sharp. So he takes his C to a D and the F to an F sharp, and that gives you the first and the third of the D chord. Now, what I choose to do is just omit the F sharp at that point. Okay? And so my next note will be A, the 5th of that key. But let me give you a little hint here of something that I do that's kind of interesting. On one of my knee levers, and we'll get into this later as we study all my pulls on my guitar, but I take my bottom, what would be a C note at this point, and I drop it, and it goes all the way down to an A. Okay, so I've got both of these big notes, and they're dropping all the way down to a D and an A, so that gives me a 5th on the bottom, so that's why I can do stuff like this. So you can kind of see what I'm doing there. Then I'm just doing kind of what a bass guitarist would do, just alternating my D and my A. So you got. Okay. So where I might not have that low F sharp in there, I think the advantage of having the A at the bottom really gives me some nice options as I'm moving along in music to drop down below that tonic note and get that 5th. So I do a lot with that. But let's move on here. In looking at the strings from the D upwards, so the F sharp is omitted, then I go A, and everything else falls into balance at that point. Then you got your 7th note, which is very important to that whole sound that we're doing there. And of course you can add the E note, which gives you a 9th. So now you got just a strong D9 chord. And then from that point, he also then pulls the G down to an F sharp. I do the very same thing with my first pedal, and that becomes a G, or an F sharp rather. So G to F sharp, and that gives me actually my first third that I'm using there. You've already on the C6 side used that on the 10th string, so I've got it right there. And then of course the next couple of strings is also available to you. So at that point then you have another A note, which is just a fifth, and then you have another seventh. Okay, so now this is really getting interesting, because on my first, what would be your 8 strings, I've got all of this right here. And then remember, I've got the low A, they're available too. Okay, and even one more note, if I wanted, I could go ahead and reach out here and hit my fourth string is a D at that point. Okay, so that actually gives me another root note at the top. So from my strings 12 all the way through 4, I really have this whole setup going. So you can hear the fullness of that. Okay, one more thing on this pedal number 5. Also, that it's pretty common for someone to raise the top note, which is G sharp. Now I get my top note G with my second string. Also with my first pedal, I pull that up a half a step to a C sharp. Now, not that everybody uses it, for this purpose, but just simply put there, the top 3 strings of the C6 tuning is C, E, G. So if you pull that G sharp up a half step, you just simply have a nice little augmented chord. But also it obviously works out with a lot of improvising when you're really doing some picking, to kind of just hit that note real quick. It's very useful for those kind of things as well. So my first pedal and Jimmy Day's 5th pedal pretty much mirror each other, except for that third that we were talking about with the F sharp at the bottom of the tuning. But at the end of the day, I think by us having the big 5 I was talking about at the bottom there with the A note against that D, we've got something there that's probably equally as good, if not better in some respects, just depending on what you're trying to do.